Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Delta CEP from Radical Technologies. This is actually a DSP based monosynth, but with 4-voice paraphony based around the Radical Technologies Swarm Oscillator, which is essentially, again, a digital thing. And the thing that's quite interesting about this is a lot of it's digital. There's a digital filter, there's a digital oscillator. VCA is analog, but there's also an analog filter as well, and also some digital effects, together with some patchability along the bottom here, and some memories and something called the interpolator. There's also a MIDI to CV converter and a little quantizer built in. So it's actually quite, we did a piece with Jörg Schaff, I think the tail end of last year, after Synthfest, and we had a listen to it. And I thought I'd take a look. This is the desktop version. The desktop version is actually what we looked at before, but I hadn't had my hands on it really. This is really built. It's a very heavy and solid piece of equipment. And I'll say right up front, it's not cheap. You know, it does cost around about £1,000, perhaps a little bit more. I'll put the price below. But I want to get that out there straight away. And the reason it's expensive is because, A, they've built it in Germany, using German workers, and they kind of wanted to make sure that everybody who worked on it got a fair price, which is an ethical and a philosophical standpoint, perfectly okay. So if you want to support that, that is entirely your call. But also they use really good quality components. So not only that, it's also got kind of various European stuff, like you've got to have it to auto power off and whatnot. So it's basically built that way. It's also got a really good solid power supply that comes in a beautiful little felt case. Really quite impressive. So let's take a look at the basic stuff with this guy, because I think you'll be quite surprised at how beefy and analog it sounds. So let's take a look at this. This is the Swarm Oscillator, and this is at the heart of the whole thing. And this is developed from, there was a Eurorack module that Jörg Schaff also developed. This is DSP only. So let's take a look. So we'll start with the sawtooth and then we'll sweep through. So goes round to sine. It's got a good solid fundamental and some low frequency content, comes around to triangle, and then to sawtooth, and then to square. Sound pretty nice actually, these waves. With the Swarm Oscillator we're able to clone these, so we can add a, watch the volume here. We'll bring up to 8 by dialing this knob, and then we have the detune between them. So that, you know, you'll probably recognise that sound. That's that sort of super saw sound, and it's actually quite a sort of Germanic. It reminds me of the Access Virus. It reminds me of the Spectralis and some of the other synths that have come out of Germany that are DSP based. So there's a sort of, it's got that thing going on. The other thing that we can do here is we can modulate the shape up, as well as the actual waveform. We can modulate this, but we can modulate the shape of the wave. So we do this by pressing Shift. So if I go to square, and then we'll just come back here, we're modulating the pulse width. Now, it's possible to do that via the LFO. This is a slight limitation. It seems like to me that it would make sense for the LFO to be normalized to the mod input, but it's not. So we have to patch it like this. So we can modulate to the left, we're modulating the actual shape of the wave. And we can do this with all of these, so they all become quite interesting shapes. But if we turn it this way, we're modulating the actual waveform. So those are the differences. So that gives us quite a lot of ability to deal with this. And again, we can dial in all of this. So yes, we can get pulse width modulation. And yeah, it's all pretty good. There's another mode to the Swarm Oscillator as well, and that is, well, 2 modes in fact, because it's paraphonic. So if we take this out of here, maybe add some effects. get some quite nice waveform sound. Modulating the shape or indeed the waveform itself. Some quite nice stuff, but there's another mode, which again we go shift, let's take that out of there, take these down, and we can dial in chords. Which are up to stacked up to 4 notes, and we bring those in with the density. And we can detune 2 oscillators, so eventually we get up to 4 notes stacked with 2 oscillators per voice that can then be detuned. So we got some pretty radical, excuse the pun, and quite big beefy sounds, which is a monosynth, we've got a lot of stuff going on there. A couple of other things about this, we can set the mod wheel is automatically mapped, so we again shift and dial in a do this without just sort of normalised, but like I say, it would have been nice to have the LFO normalised to the mod wheel, because without this doesn't really do anything. Also normalised to the cutoff, because without that doesn't really do anything. You know, and because there's so limited amounts of knobs on the front panel, we could have actually saved on a bit of shift functioning, which is one thing that is a bit fiddly. Now, while I'm on the subject of control, we can store all of this stuff. There's 40 presets in here, but we can't modulate all of the parameters. Like, for instance, modulating this, I think would make a lot of sense, but I can't do that. And at the moment, none of these respond to or send MIDI CCs, though this is something that can be easily fixed with a firmware update, and I suggest they do that pronto, because it would open up a lot of things. The only way we can actually modify this is by storing snapshots, and snapshots are, in each sound, there are up to 8 snapshots, where you can store a kind of snapshot of the panel and then morph between them either using the knob or various other ways. So it is possible to modulate and change all of those things. It's just sort of removed from that immediacy of modulation routing. Okay, so let's get onto the filter. We'll start with our usual sawtooth in. And I should mention there are 3 kinds of filters. They're multi-mode filters. At least the first and the third are. What you do is you press shift, and there's a digital 12 dB filter. There's a digital 24 dB filter, and then there's an analog 12 dB filter. But I think you'll find the digital 12 dB filter sounds really quite good. So in low pass mode, we've got 3 modes for each one, and we can have them all together. But let's start with low pass. Take the 50% resonance. Some lovely harmonics in there, actually, has to be said. And then we've got, and then the high pass. We can get some good stuff here. And then we've got the analog 12 dB filter, which just has a nice bit of quality to it as well, and it starts to get really nice when you modulate. Again, we've got to patch it, which is kind of irritating. So if I actually just hold, so I press and hold this, we'll just jump between the filters. Now the 12 dB filter is quite interesting because it's actually stereo. So you've got essentially the ability to have this modulation that comes left and right, and it's actually quite interesting. You don't get the same with the 24 dB filter. So analog 12, digi 24, digi 12. Nice. I like the sound of the digital filters, but it's nice to have the choice, and it's interesting that we get that stereo path as well. It just again adds some more stereo imaging, and if you just want it in mono, you just unplug one side. I mean, it's a little bit old school, but yeah, you could do that, but you can have stereo but they've all got their different characteristic, which gives you that nice extra flavour. So another thing to check is at the end of the treble for the level of the oscillators, there's this blue section which adds a bit of distortion. So if we go into a sine, add some release, add a bit of effects, and then start to dial it in, maybe go into paraphonic. We get some quite, particularly with the resonance. But while it is digital distortion, it's got some nice. Some really quite nice atmospheric and pluck out those extra harmonics just by using the drive into the filter. It just gives you a little bit more tonal palette to play with. So I've got another little patch here, which is a paraphonic patch, shows the chords off quite nicely. I'm just modulating the VCF. I press play. Let's bring the effects up. So this is the tape delay effects, which is effects algorithm. It's got a little bit of it's quite nice actually, but with the tape delay we can get some really, really positive and negative feedback. Almost Carpler strong, and then we can modulate. Some really interesting stuff there. Right, let's get back to, so we go to our second algorithm, which is just a regular delay. Let's have a look. So, and this goes really long. So for instance, I might go 2, 3, 4. That's about, what, sounds like about 4.5, 5 seconds, something like that. So it's a good long delay. I think there's a bit of stereo going on. It's a bit hard to tell. Additional algorithms. We go into, this is chorus, and we've got, you get some quite extreme stuff, goes quite high up. Quite interesting. Right, let's get into phaser. Again, you get some quite nice extreme stuff. And then finally we got a flanger. Let's just take that down a bit and have a listen. And again we got the mod rate goes. So we can get sort of from subtle to extreme, no reverbs or anything, it's all just kind of time-based and modulation. But yeah, some quite nice effects there, and of course these can all be stored with the Delta CEP settings. The only thing I will say is the shift business, I wish there was not so much shifting going on, because sometimes you think you're shifting when you forget you've got your finger on this shift button. So it can get a little bit frustrating. You go, damn, I had a sweet spot and I'm not adjusting the parameter I thought I was. So let's have a look at the LFO. LFO has got 5 waves. sine, triangle, sawtooth, square and random. We've got a depth control here. I've patched it into the cutoff. We've also got a depth control, so 2 depth controls, both positive and negative. We're hearing it in stereo there because this is the 12 dB filter, which has a stereo aspect to it. Let's see how fast. Get some interesting. Some nice audio rate mod on that. Quite like that actually, that's quite nice. Let's take that. Let's see how far it goes up into the audio rate. So we're going to take the output of the LFO into the external input. Let's turn that on there. So that's not bad. Let's see, is it possible to maybe patch the CV into the speed input of the LFO and get essentially a second oscillator or third oscillator? No, I'm playing an octave here and it's not, it's about a fifth. So we don't have CV scaling on the LFO, which is a shame because it's not a bad sounding oscillator. But so pretty handy there. I mean, obviously we can clock to external MIDI coming in or the internal tempo of the unit. No unipolar mode, which would have been nice for, particularly for square wave and pitch. And no single shot mode, which as this is DSP, you'd think there might be some additional things. Again, also a shame we haven't got CV control. That would have been handy as an extra oscillator, but not in this case, I'm afraid. Right, so I just want to also show you the quantizer because there's a little voltage quantizer in here, which is kind of useful. Voltage quantizer is typically used to take a sort of incoming signal and quantize it to pitches, use it with analog sequencers, loads of other stuff as well. It's useful for keeping things on scale. The Delta CEP has this separate circuit here, and in this patch I'm just going to take the envelope out and go into the volt per octave, but I've also combined that with the pitch CV so I can play both. So now I play. Here at the end, it's running down a scale from the voltage supplied by the envelope. So I'll just mess around with this a little bit more just because it's kind of a fun patch. So I've got a chord happening here. And on a square wave, bit of delay. Quite a unique and interesting sound. Obviously, pitch quantizers generally are quite useful if you've got some external gear, if you're running this with some additional modular stuff, which this is sort of designed to integrate with, then you could use that for something like a Turing machine or whatever. It's also worth pointing out that a lot of I/O, even on a digital thing, is going to mean that there's a lot more D to A and A to D because all these signals have to be converted into the outside world and back again. So that does add a little bit to the expense. Also, you can set, I think there's up to 15 preset scales in it, and you can set the root note, and it's just a question of pressing this button here and selecting your scale or selecting the scale root using these two knobs. Okay, so let's take a look at patch mode because obviously this is a programmable synthesizer. There are up to 40 patches in here. You access this by pressing the patch key and then you just shift through plus or minus. There are 5 banks and they're indicated by this. This is really handy. It's very useful to have 40 patches. I mean, obviously there is a slight sort of identity crisis here because obviously if I've got patches with cables going on, it's not remembering that stuff, but it's remembering the basic sound and all the other settings. The other thing that it's got is this morphing feature. So if I just now recall the patch, you can hear that there's a sequence running and the sound is changing. I'll come out of morph mode, and that's because each of the sounds has up to eight kind of snapshots that allow you to store the front panel settings, and you can sequence through them either using this morph knob here or using an internal tempo and that sequence and clocks through the various divisions, or mapping aftertouch or the mod wheel. So you can use it to actually store subsets of sounds, and they can be completely and radically different, and that's actually quite powerful. It's called the interpolator. I find it a little bit fiddly to use, but it's also very powerful. So I think, so if I press morph, you can see it's running on the clock, but also you'll see when I want to adjust the sound, it sort of disables the front panel when I'm in morph mode. And that's, I mean, I guess that's so that you don't get parameter jumps and whatnot. So you have to be a bit careful when you're using it. So if I now come to another patch here, here's another one which has got sequences running. So there's modulating or the morphing the actual pitch here as well. But again, the front panel is disabled. And this is where I have a slight issue with it, and that's because essentially what happens is if I've got that sequence running beautifully and I really like it, to update all of those patches, if I wanted to change the filter, I'd have to go through and store each snapshot on top of it to sort of overwrite it, to modify it. So it's harder to modify globally. So to demonstrate morphing, I'm setting it up, I'm just going to press, I've got a sequence here, I'm going to play that, and I like the fact that I'm going to bring in, so that's my first start point. So snapshot, save that, second slot, I'm going to put that in, save that. Third one, I'm going to go to square wave. Save. Fourth one, bring in some noise. Save that. Stop. So I've changed quite a lot of parameters there altogether, so I've stored those in snapshots. Now, in my morph mode, I'm going to go to mode 3, which basically maps the mod wheel to the morph point. So I'm in morph mode. So now I can play my sequence. So you can see I'm changing quite a lot of stuff, and that could be a number of things that I would want to change. I could change anything on the front panel. The reason I'm not doing that is because there are a couple of things that are a bit annoying. I have to come out of patch mode and then I store that, but the morph mode, sorry. But needless to say, you know, aside from those operational issues that I have, it's a very powerful system. It's just, I'm not sure I'd want to spend a lot of time programming that. For maybe small changes, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But for really big sequences, which is, it's also possible to do that in there, the amount of time you have to put in does feel like a lot of time you have to put in. The Delta CEP A is available in Eurorack version and a desktop version. The Eurorack version is a bit cheaper, it's at £780 UK. The Eurorack version is £1080, so it is quite expensive. But in its defence, A, they are paying people a fair wage in Germany and wherever that they're building it, so that's always good to support. But also you've got a lot of this I/O, and this is all audio rate stuff, so that in the digital world is a little bit more expensive. Where I think they could have improved, or can improve, because it's a firmware thing, I'd like to see MIDI CC control of all the front panels, because it's digital, so it would output that stuff. I think that's going to be done because not everybody's going to get on with the interpolator way of working. Some people like it, some people don't. The thing is, all of these parameter changes in the interpolator can affect what's happening in the I/O of the patch points. So when you're integrating it with a modular system, because this will play very nicely with that, it gives you quite a lot of recallability. Anyway, that was the Delta CEP A from Radical Technologies. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.